What will you do when the man you've loved for almost 5 years trades you away the night before your engagement, and the man who steps in to claim you is his own father? But Liana realized she hadn't just married into protection. She'd married into a war where being disposable was the kindest thing someone could call her. Welcome to the channel, lovelies. Please like and subscribe. Liana Richards stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom at the Han estate in Bel Air, watching the moonlight cut geometric patterns across the marble floor below. 4.5 years with Minw, and she still couldn't sleep in this house. Too big, too quiet, the kind of silence that made you aware of your own breathing. Tomorrow was supposed to be the engagement party, the official one where his family would finally accept what had been true for years, that she belonged here, that she'd earned her place not just in Minwoo's life, but in theirs. Her throat felt dry. She needed water, maybe air, maybe just to move instead of lying there running through tomorrow's guest list for the 100th time. The kitchen was downstairs, past the gallery hallway with its collection of modern Korean art that Minwoo's grandmother had personally curated. Liana pulled on the silk robe Minw had given her last Christmas and stepped into the corridor. The house settled around her with small, creaking sounds, expensive wood adjusting to the temperature drop. She was halfway down the curved staircase when she heard voices coming from the study. Male voices, low and deliberate. The kind of conversation that happened behind closed doors for a reason. The study door was cracked open maybe 3 inches, a wedge of golden light spilling onto the hallway runner. She should have kept walking. Should have gotten her water and gone back upstairs and maintained the polite fiction that she hadn't heard anything. But something in the tone stopped her. Some quality of finality that made the hair on her arms stand up. Liana moved closer, her bare feet silent on the runner. Through the gap, she could see Minw sitting at his grandfather's old desk, the one that had supposedly been in the family for 3 generations. 2 lawyers she didn't recognize flanked him, men in dark suits with the kind of faces that specialized in making problems disappear. Minwoo's uncle stood behind them, and in the corner, barely visible, his grandmother sat with her hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait. One of the lawyers slid a document across the desk. The 100 million in infrastructure debt will be forgiven once you complete the termination, he said, his voice carrying the mechanical pleasantness of someone who did this often. The family's financial exposure will be eliminated within the quarter. Minw picked up a pen. His hand didn't shake. Liana watched him read, watched his eyes move across lines of text she couldn't see, watched him nod once and bring the pen to paper. The scratch of ink on expensive paper sounded unnaturally loud. "And the statement?" Minw asked. "We'll need something that plays well." The second lawyer opened a portfolio. "Already prepared. You'll cite irreconcilable differences stemming from cultural and professional incompatibility. We've focus grouped the language. It polls as sympathetic while maintaining your reputation integrity." Liana's hand found the wall. The plaster felt cool, solid, real in a way the conversation she was hearing didn't quite manage. Cultural and professional incompatibility, like their 4.5 years, could be reduced to market-tested phrases that played well with demographics. Minwoo's grandmother shifted in her chair, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd made harder decisions than this before breakfast. "You've had your fun, Minw. But we're negotiating with the Park family now, and they won't touch us with that woman attached to your name. She's made you soft. Unreliable. The Chinese distribution deal fell through because you were too busy playing house to close properly." That woman. Liana had sat across from this woman at dozens of dinners, had listened to her talk about family legacy and the importance of building something that lasted, had believed, stupidly, that she might eventually be considered part of that legacy instead of an obstacle to it. Minw nodded. Just nodded, like his grandmother had commented on the weather instead of casually destroying the future they'd planned. "The engagement party," he said. "We still do it." "Of course," his uncle said. "Cancelling now would raise questions. You make the announcement there." in front of everyone. Control the narrative from the start. And Liana? We'll be shocked and heartbroken, like anyone would be, the first lawyer said. We'll have our PR team ready to manage any fallout, but realistically, what can she do? She's a screenwriter with one greenlit project that we financed. She has no platform, no family infrastructure. This will be painful for her, certainly, but not complicated for us. Liana's phone was in her robe pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands, switched it to video, and held it to the gap in the door. The angle wasn't perfect, but it would capture audio, and audio was enough. She watched through her phone screen as they spent the next 30 minutes discussing her disposal with the clinical efficiency of accountants reviewing a bad investment. Minw asked about timing. His grandmother suggested talking points for the family to use with mutual acquaintances. The lawyers outlined a media strategy that painted Minw as mature and thoughtful, someone making a difficult but necessary decision about his future. Not once did anyone mention love. Not once did Minw hesitate or push back or suggest that maybe 4.5 years meant something more than a line item to be resolved. He signed 3 more documents. He accepted a folder from his uncle that probably contained the script for tomorrow's performance. He thanked the lawyers for coming so late. Liana stopped recording and backed away from the door, her body moving on autopilot while her mind struggled to process what she'd just witnessed. She made it back upstairs into the guest room and stood there staring at her suitcase like it was written in a language she'd forgotten how to read. She could confront them. She could walk back down there right now, throw open the study door, and watch them scramble to explain. But explain what exactly? That they'd been planning to throw her away like a bad investment? That the engagement party tomorrow was actually an execution disguised as a celebration? That she'd spent 4.5 years building a life with someone who'd just signed her out of existence with a pen that probably cost more than her monthly rent? Liana packed in the dark. Everything she'd brought to the estate fit into 2 bags, which seemed like its own kind of evidence about how little space she'd actually taken up here. She left the engagement ring on the nightstand. 2 carats, princess cut, his grandmother's design specifications. She'd never really liked it anyway. The house was still quiet when she slipped out the side entrance and called a car. Dawn was just starting to break over Los Angeles, turning the sky that particular shade of pink that photographers loved and everyone else barely noticed. She watched the Han estate disappear behind her and thought about how tomorrow would go, how Minw would stand up in front of everyone they knew and deliver his market-tested statement, how he'd look appropriately regretful but ultimately resolute, how his family would close ranks around him while she stood there, publicly humiliated, with absolutely no recourse because he was right. What could she actually do? The engagement party happened anyway. Of course it did. Cancelling would have raised questions, and the Han family didn't do anything that raised questions they weren't prepared to answer. Liana had her phone silenced, but she couldn't stop herself from checking it, watching the Instagram stories pile up from people who didn't know they were attending an execution. The venue looked beautiful. Everyone looked happy. And then Minw stood up with a microphone and did exactly what the lawyers had scripted. Her phone started ringing 30 seconds after he finished talking. Friends, colleagues, her agent, all of them wanting to know what happened. If she was okay, what they could do. She turned it off and sat in her apartment, the small 1-bedroom in Silver Lake she'd kept even after Minw suggested she move into his place full-time, and watched the sun set through her window. Liana is a remarkable woman, Minw had said, according to the texts she'd gotten before shutting everything down. But we've realised we want different futures. I wish her every success in her own world. Her own world, like they hadn't been building one together. Like 4.5 years of shared dinners and inside jokes and plans for the future could be reduced to a polite dismissal that played well with focus groups. She had the recording. She had 30 minutes of them planning her disposal like she was a problem to be managed rather than a person they were hurting. And she had absolutely no idea what to do with it. 4 days passed in a blur of ignored phone calls, and half-hearted attempts to convince herself she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was numb, which was different. The kind of numb that let you move through space without actually feeling anything about it. The production company where she'd kept an office, Minw's production company, technically, though she'd been stupid enough to think of it as theirs, had emailed to say they needed the space back. Professional courtesy suggested she collect her things quickly to avoid awkwardness. Liana went at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, late enough that most people would be gone. The office still had her name on the door, though someone had clearly started the process of removing it. The vinyl letters were peeling at the edges, half scraped away like an afterthought. She packed her notebooks and the good pens she'd bought herself, and the framed photo of her grandmother that had sat on her desk for 2 years. The parking structure was mostly empty when she finished. Concrete levels and fluorescent lighting, and the echo of her footsteps against the walls. She was halfway to her car when she heard tires on the smooth floor, too fast for the tight turns, and then a black Genesis GV80 came around the corner and stopped maybe 2 feet from where she stood. She didn't jump, didn't scream, didn't do any of the things a normal person probably would have done when a car appeared out of nowhere and almost hit them. She just stood there with her box of personal items and felt nothing, which should have scared her but didn't. The driver's door opened and a man got out. Korean, older, maybe 50. Maybe older than that in the way some people wore their age like they'd earned it instead of just accumulated it. Expensive suit but not flashy, the kind of tailoring you only noticed if you knew to look for it. And his face. God. His face was what Minw's would look like in 20 years if Minw ever developed an actual personality, instead of just inheriting one. "You're Liana Richards," the man said. Not a question, just a statement of fact delivered with the confidence of someone who already knew the answer. "And you are?" She shifted the box to her hip, calculating distances to her car, exits from this level, whether screaming would even matter in a mostly empty building. Han Sung-jun, Minw's father. That made her pause. She'd seen one photo of this man, years ago, shoved in the back of a drawer in Minw's bedroom. Minw said his father had left when he was 16, said he was nobody, said he didn't matter and they didn't talk about him. This man didn't look like nobody. He looked like someone who left because he wanted to, not because he had to. "Your son almost killed me last week," Liana said. "Emotionally speaking, now you're trying to finish the job with a car?" Something happened to Seongjun's face that might have been a smile on someone with different settings. "You didn't flinch. Most people run. I'm too tired to run." They stood there in the fluorescent wash of the parking structure, studying each other. He looked at her the way people looked at contracts before signing them, reading fine print, checking for loopholes. She looked back and thought about how Minw never looked at anyone like that, like they might be worth actual attention instead of just performance. "You recorded it," Seongjun said finally. "The conversation in the study." Every cell in her body went still. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have people in that house, always have. My ex-wife thought she'd erased me when we divorced, but I keep tabs on what's mine, including my son's mistakes." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket, held it out to her. "You stood outside that door for 33 minutes and recorded them planning how to throw you away." Smart. Useless, but smart. Liana didn't take the card. "How is it useless?" "Because what are you going to do with it? Release it? They'll bury you with NDAs and lawyers before you finish uploading. Use it for leverage? They'll cut you off from every opportunity in this industry and call it coincidence. You're angry, which is correct, but you don't have the infrastructure to do anything with that anger yet. Yet. He pressed the card into her hand. Just a phone number, no name, no business title. When you finish being sad and remember how to be angry, call me. He got back in the Genesis and drove away, leaving her standing there with her box of salvaged office supplies and this tiny rectangle of paper that felt heavier than it should. She turned it over in her fingers. The number was handwritten, which felt significant somehow. Personal in a way that printed text wouldn't have been. She kept the card, told herself she'd throw it away later. Didn't throw it away. 6 days went by. Not because she stopped being sad exactly, but because being sad wasn't paying her rent, and the production company that had greenlit her script, the one Minwoo's connections had made possible, was suddenly having budget concerns and might need to reassess the project timeline, which meant she'd been blackballed, professionally speaking, in the polite way that Hollywood did these things. Liana called the number at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. It rang twice. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to stay sad," Seung-jun said instead of hello. "I need to know what you want from me before I meet with you." "What I want is complicated. Where I am right now is simple. Koreatown, above the restaurant with the red door on 6th. Come tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." He hung up before she could respond. The restaurant was exactly where he said it would be, wedged between a nori bang and a beauty supply store. The red door looked like it led to storage, but when she pushed it open, stairs led up to a second floor that definitely wasn't on any official floor plan. The office at the top was clean and spare, the kind of space that existed specifically to not draw attention to itself. Seung-jun was already there, sitting behind a desk that looked like it had seen actual work instead of just decorative arrangement. He glanced up from his phone, put it away, and gestured to the chair across from him. No small talk, no pretense of casual conversation. "I'm proposing a marriage," he said, like he was suggesting they get coffee. "Legally binding, 1 year minimum. You'll use my name, live in a property I own, appear with me at necessary functions. In exchange, you'll have complete financial security, access to my legal team, and my protection. After the year, if you want out, you leave with $2 million and a portfolio of investments worth triple that. If you stay, we renegotiate." Liana sat back in her chair and studied him. He didn't look crazy, didn't look like he was joking. Just looked like someone presenting a business proposal that happened to involve marriage instead of mergers. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because my ex-wife has been running my organization into the ground for 8 years while I rebuilt in Seoul. I'm back now, I'm taking it all back, and walking in with you, the woman my son publicly humiliated, sends a very specific message about where the power actually lives. You're using me. We're using each other. I need someone who won't break under pressure and who has nothing to lose. You need a platform my son and his family can't touch. This isn't charity, it's strategy." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is what you'd be stepping into. I don't run casinos or traffic anything. I own the infrastructure, shipping, real estate, financial instruments that powerful people prefer to keep off their books. It's dangerous in the way standing near lightning is dangerous. Smart people don't get hit." She opened the folder. Documentation of business holdings that existed in the grey spaces between legal and illegal. Nothing technically criminal, but everything carefully structured to avoid scrutiny. It was impressive in a terrifying kind of way. The architecture of power built in shadows. "I want script approval on anything I write that involves your world," Liana said, still reading. "I'm not putting your business on screen." "Agreed. And I'm not sleeping with you. I didn't ask you to." She closed the folder and looked at him. Really looked, trying to see the angle, the trap, the inevitable betrayal that would make this just another version of what Minw had done. But all she saw was calculation and something that might have been respect. 1 year, she said. 1 year. They shook hands. His grip was firm but not performative, the handshake of someone who'd done this enough times to know it meant something. The courthouse wedding happened on a Wednesday at 10 a.m., because apparently that's when people got married, when it was strategy instead of love. 2 witnesses she'd never met showed up to sign papers. Older Korean men who looked at her with the professional interest of people who'd witnessed stranger business decisions. Liana wore cream because white felt like a lie and anything else felt like giving up. Seung-jun wore charcoal grey. The judge looked bored. The whole thing took 11 minutes. "I've arranged a penthouse for you in West Hollywood," Seung-jun said afterward. standing on the courthouse steps while downtown Los Angeles moved around them with typical indifference. 20 minutes from my main residence in Los Feliz. The place is furnished. You're welcome at the main house whenever you want, but I assumed you'd prefer your own territory first. He was right. The penthouse was empty in that expensive way, like a hotel suite that cost 4 figures a night and felt exactly as lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, kitchen with appliances she'd need to learn how to use, bedroom with a bed big enough for 3 people who would never be there. It felt like living inside someone else's life, which she supposed she was. The first week they didn't see each other. She moved her things from Silver Lake, which took approximately 1 carload. She bought groceries. She sat on the expensive couch and stared at her laptop and pretended she was going to write something. The second week, Seung-jun showed up on Tuesday night with Korean takeout from a place that definitely didn't deliver to random people. He'd remembered she liked japchae. They ate at the dining table that had never been used, and they talked about nothing important. Her college years, his early days in LA, the strange physics of starting over when you thought you'd already built something permanent. He didn't ask about Minw, didn't probe her wounds or try to position himself as savior instead of strategic partner. Just existed in the same space for 90 minutes and left. Thursday of that week, he brought wine and asked what she was writing. Not in the polite way people asked when they didn't actually care, but like he was genuinely curious about how stories worked. She told him about the script she was actually working on now, the one that had nothing to do with Minwoo's blood money connections or his family's distribution deals. He listened like he was watching a movie in his head, seeing the scenes she described play out behind his eyes. Week 3, she started cooking. Real cooking, not just reheating takeout. Seung-jun brought groceries on Tuesday. Good ones. Ingredients she'd mentioned liking once in passing. He'd been paying attention, which felt strange and significant in ways she didn't know how to process. They developed a rhythm. Tuesday and Thursday dinners, sometimes Wednesday if his schedule allowed. He taught her Korean phrases, the formal ones first, and then the ones you only used with people you actually trusted. She made him laugh exactly twice in 3 weeks. Both times felt like winning something. "You're better at this than I expected," he said one Thursday, watching her plate bibimbap with the kind of careful arrangement his mother had probably taught him to notice. "At cooking?" "At existing in uncertainty. Most people need to know what something is before they can participate in it. You're just participating. Maybe I'm too tired to overthink it. Maybe you're smarter than you think." There was a film industry gala at LACMA in week 4, some annual thing where people wore expensive clothes and pretended the networking was incidental to the art. Minw would be there. His family's production company was receiving an innovation award for something they'd probably acquired rather than actually innovated. Seung-jun told her about it 3 days in advance. "You don't have to go." "Yes, I do." She got a dress. Not revealing, not trying too hard. Black, structured, the kind of thing that photographed like architecture instead of decoration. Hair up, because she wanted her face visible. Jewelry from her grandmother, the real pieces that meant something instead of borrowed diamonds that meant nothing. When Seung-jun picked her up that Saturday evening, he looked at her for a long moment before saying anything. "You look like you're going to war." "Isn't that what this is?" "Yes, but most people pretend otherwise." They arrived at LACMA after the reception line, but before dinner, the timing calculated to make an entrance without seeming desperate for attention. Seung-jun's hand rested at the small of her back as they walked in. Light enough to be respectful, firm enough to be claimed. They moved through the crowd like they owned the room, which in ways he still wasn't fully explaining. Maybe he did. Minw was standing near the bar with his mother and his new fiancé, some actress Liana recognized from supporting roles in films that hadn't quite broken through. They all turned when Seung-jun and Liana entered, some instinct for threat assessment making them look. Madame Han's face did something complicated. cycling through surprise and recognition and what might have been fear. Minw went pale, actually pale, colour draining from his face like someone had opened a valve. Seung-jun walked them straight past without stopping, without acknowledging them, like they were furniture instead of family. But Liana stopped, turned, looked directly at Minw and said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Congratulations on the award. I know how hard you've worked on other people's achievements." Then she turned back to Seung-jun, and they kept moving, his hand steady at her back, guiding her toward their table. Behind them, silence. Then the buzz of conversations starting up again, whispers spreading through the room like wildfire through dry brush. By the time they reached their table, 4 different producers had stopped by to say hello to Seung-jun. He introduced her each time the same way. "My wife Liana, she's a writer." Not "my new wife," not "you might know her." Just the fact, simple and unmovable as gravity. Minw left before dinner was served, his new fiancé trailing behind him looking confused, his mother staying behind to do damage control with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Liana watched them go and felt something shift in her chest, something that had been frozen finally starting to thaw. Not happiness exactly, not even satisfaction. Just the recognition that she'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade, and that choice had teeth. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, which Liana would later think was appropriate because Tuesdays had become significant in ways she hadn't planned for. The doorman called up to say a delivery had come for Mrs. Han, and she still wasn't used to that name, still had to pause for a second before remembering that was her now. The box was white, expensive cardboard, the kind that usually held something beautiful. She set it on the kitchen counter and opened it carefully, pulling back tissue paper to reveal white chrysanthemums arranged with the kind of precision that came from professional florists who knew exactly what they were doing. Funeral flowers. In Korean culture, white chrysanthemums meant death and mourning, the flowers you brought to memorial services and left at graves. Liana had learned that from Seung-jun during one of their dinners, when he'd been teaching her about cultural markers that mattered in ways Americans didn't always understand. The card was small, cream-coloured, printed in elegant script. "Some mistakes can't be fixed. Some doors should stay closed. A concerned friend." Her hands were remarkably steady as she pulled out her phone and photographed the flowers, the box, the card. She sent all 3 images to Seung-jun with a message that just said, "Delivery. Thoughts?" He called before she'd even set the phone down. "Don't touch anything else in that box," he said without preamble. "Don't smell the flowers, don't move them, don't do anything. I'm sending someone." "You think they're poisoned?" "I think people who send funeral flowers don't stop at symbolism, stay away from them, until Ji-won gets there." The woman who arrived 23 minutes later was Korean, late 30s, moving with the kind of efficiency that suggested military training or something close to it. She wore dark jeans and a blazer that didn't quite hide the shoulder holster underneath. Ji-won, Seung-jun had said her name was, and she didn't waste time on introductions. She examined the flowers without touching them, then pulled out what looked like a portable scanner and ran it over the arrangement. Whatever it detected made her expression tighten. She used gloves to transfer everything, flowers, box, card, into bags she'd brought with her. "The flowers themselves are clean," Ji-won said, her English carrying barely a trace of accent. "But the water they're sitting in has something in it, not lethal probably, but enough to make you very sick if you'd gotten it on your hands and then touched your face." Liana sat down at the kitchen counter because her legs had suddenly decided they were done holding her up. Someone actually tried to poison me. Someone tried to send a message. The poison was just punctuation. Seung-jun arrived an hour later, and he wasn't the controlled, measured man she'd gotten used to seeing. He was angry in that particularly terrifying way where everything got quieter instead of louder, more precise instead of explosive. "My ex-wife," he said, standing in her living room like he was calculating trajectories and outcomes. "She's decided you're a problem." I gathered that from the funeral flowers. He didn't smile, didn't even acknowledge the attempt at lightness. Just looked at her with an expression that made her understand, maybe for the first time, exactly what kind of world she'd actually married into. I need to explain something, he said finally, about why I left LA 8 years ago, about what I've actually been doing in Seoul. They sat, and he told her. About how Madame Han hadn't just divorced him, but systematically taken over his network while he was rebuilding overseas. About how she'd used his infrastructure, his connections, his carefully built reputation to create her own power base. About how she'd spent 8 years making absolutely certain he couldn't come back without starting a war that would destroy everything. So why did you come back? Liana asked. If she'd fortified everything that well? Because she's gotten sloppy, greedy. She's making the kind of moves that get federal attention. And when that house of cards collapses, it'll bury everything I built. I'm here to extract what's mine before she destroys it all. And I'm what? Bait? You're a statement that I'm not afraid of her anymore. He paused. I should have told you this before we married, that marrying me would make you a target for someone who doesn't believe in proportional responses. That night, Liana went down to the parking garage to get something from her car and found the word carved into the driver's side paint. Not creative, just vicious. The kind of slur that was designed to hurt in the most basic way possible. She stood there staring at it for a long moment, then took a photo and sent it to Sungjun without comment. The car was replaced by morning. Not repaired, replaced entirely. A new vehicle in the same parking spot, with her name already on the registration. And there was someone stationed in the garage now. A man who nodded at her politely, but whose presence made it clear he was there specifically to make sure nothing else happened to her property or her person. This escalates from here, Seung-jun told her over breakfast that he'd brought to her place instead of waiting for their usual dinner schedule. She's testing boundaries, seeing what makes you break, what makes me overreact. It gets worse before it gets better. How much worse? I don't know. That's the problem. He set down his coffee. You can still walk away. I'll make sure you're protected, set you up somewhere she can't reach, give you everything I promised plus enough security to… No. Liana, I said no. She wants me scared. She wants me running. Then she gets exactly what she wanted, which is you isolated and easier to destroy. Liana leaned forward. I'm not going anywhere, so tell me what I need to know to be useful instead of just protected. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Okay, then we do this properly. 3 days later, Seung-jun had business in Seoul, real business, the kind that required his physical presence and couldn't be handled through intermediaries. 3 weeks, he said, maybe 4, depending on how negotiations went. Come with me, he said. And it wasn't quite a question, but wasn't quite a command either. More like an invitation to something that mattered. Seoul was different from the first moment they landed. The penthouse there was actually his, not a strategic outpost or a hotel suite with expensive furniture, but a place where he lived. Books in Korean and English lined the shelves. Art that clearly meant something instead of just matching the decor. A kitchen that showed evidence of actual use. He was someone here, not in the performing way Minw had been someone, but in the genuine way of a person who'd built something real and didn't need to prove it. She met his people over the next few days. Not employees, though some of them technically were. Partners. The ones who'd stayed loyal when he left LA, who'd helped him rebuild in Seoul, who trusted him in ways that went beyond business contracts. They were skeptical of her at first, this black American woman who'd married the boss under circumstances that didn't quite add up to romance. But she sat in on meetings anyway, stayed quiet, watched how Seung-jun operated. He wasn't louder here, wasn't more aggressive or dominant. He was quieter, actually, more certain. Like he didn't need to take up extra space because everyone already knew exactly how much space was his. One night there was a dinner with a rival family, the kind of carefully orchestrated social event that was actually a negotiation disguised as hospitality. Liana wore red because Seung-jun had mentioned it photographed well, and she was learning that being seen mattered as much as being present. The test came from a younger guy, maybe 30, sitting across from her with the kind of smirk that suggested he'd already decided she didn't matter. He said something in English, probably assuming Seung-jun wouldn't catch it. I didn't realize decorative wives were part of the negotiation now. The table didn't quite go silent, but the conversation definitely paused. Liana could feel Seung-jun start to turn toward her, probably to intervene, probably to handle this the way he handled everything, with precision and calculated force. She beat him to it, responding in Korean with phrasing she'd learned from their dinners. Not perfect, but clear enough. Better decorative than disposable. Now the table did go silent. The younger guy's smirk evaporated. His boss, an older man at the head of the table, looked at Liana with something that might have been respect, or might have been reassessment. Then Seung-jun laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension, and everyone relaxed. The rival boss apologized for his associate's rudeness. The dinner continued. But something had shifted, some understanding that she wasn't just an accessory or a statement piece, but an actual person who could hold her own. Later, in the car back to the penthouse, Seung-jun said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. They need to know I'm not a liability." "You're not." The way he said it landed differently than it would have 2 months ago, carried weight that hadn't been there before. Back in LA 4 weeks later, things shifted again. Seung-jun started teaching her properly. Not just casual cultural lessons over dinner, but actual education about the world they were operating in. Not how to fight, she wasn't built for that, and they both knew it. But how to read situations, how to spot threats before they materialized. What leverage actually meant when you stripped away the abstraction. She learned about the business in practical terms. Who owed what, which debts actually mattered, how money moved when it wasn't supposed to be seen or tracked. He showed her organizational charts that would never appear in any official documentation, explained power structures that existed entirely in relationships and obligations rather than contracts. Ji-won taught her other things, how to check her car for tampering before getting in, what to keep in her bag beyond the usual phone and wallet, exit strategies from common locations, restaurants, office buildings, parking structures, the kind of paranoia that kept you alive when people wanted you scared or gone. One afternoon, Ji-won brought her to a private range in the valley, the kind of place that didn't advertise and required references to access. "You don't have to carry," Ji-won said, setting a weapon on the counter between them, "but you should know how, in case you ever need to pick one up." Liana learned. She wasn't great, wasn't ever going to be someone who could handle herself in actual combat. But she was competent. Good enough to not hurt herself, good enough to maybe create an opportunity if everything went sideways. Good enough. At the penthouse, she was writing again. Different material now, darker and more precise than anything she'd done before. Stories about power and what it actually cost, about the space between choice and necessity, about people who made impossible decisions and lived with them. The pages piled up faster than they had in years. Seung-jun read them sometimes when she left pages out on the kitchen counter. He never commented unless she asked, respected the boundary between observing her work and intruding on it. But when she did ask, his notes were better than most studio executives she'd worked with. "You're treating this character like he's evil," he said one Thursday night, pointing to a scene she'd written about a man making an impossible choice. "He's not. He's just tired. There's a difference." She looked at the pages again, saw what he meant, rewrote the entire scene. He was right. The character wasn't a villain. Just someone who'd run out of better options and was doing the best he could with what remained. The betrayal came from inside, which Liana would later realize should have been obvious because that's always where betrayals came from. David Kim was a lawyer Seung-jun trusted, Second-generation Korean American, Harvard-educated, been with the organization for 6 years, handling the clean side of things. Contracts, real estate, the legitimate business structures that made everything else possible. He'd been helpful to Liana, explaining things Seung-jun didn't have time to cover, walking her through documentation that would have been incomprehensible otherwise. She'd thought of him as an ally, maybe even a friend in a world where she didn't have many. He showed up at her penthouse on a Wednesday night. Said he needed to talk to her about some paperwork, something routine that needed her signature. She let him in because why wouldn't she? Poured wine because that's what you did when colleagues came by, settled in for what she assumed would be a boring conversation about legal documentation. David drank more of the wine than he should have, got agitated in a way that seemed out of proportion to whatever paperwork he was supposedly there to discuss. And then it came out, words tumbling over each other, in a confession he clearly hadn't planned to make, but couldn't hold back anymore. "I need to tell you something about Seung-jun," he started, and everything in Liana went still. He'd been in love with Madame Han for 3 years. She'd recruited him carefully and deliberately, using proximity to Seung-jun's operation to gather intelligence while David convinced himself it was romance instead of manipulation. He'd been feeding her information the entire time. Not everything. Not enough to completely destroy Seung-jun's organization, but enough to give her advantages at critical moments. But I'm telling you now because she wants to hurt you, Liana. Really hurt you. I thought I could manage it, keep you safe while still... David's hands were shaking around his wineglass. I thought I could protect you both, but she's planning something and I can't. Get out, Liana said, her voice remarkably calm considering her heart was trying to break through her ribcage. Liana, you don't understand what she's capable of. I understand that you've been compromised and you're here because you want me to forgive you for whatever's coming next. I'm not going to do that. Get out of my home. He left, stumbling slightly, looking back once like he wanted to say something else. Liana locked the door behind him and immediately called Seung-jun. He was there in 15 minutes, walking into her penthouse with an expression that told her he'd been expecting something like this eventually. She told him everything, every word of David's confession, every detail she could remember about his body language and tone, and the specific things he'd said about Madame Han's plans. Seung-jun's face didn't change as he listened, but something behind his eyes went flat and cold, in a way that made her understand exactly what happened to people who betrayed him. "Pack a bag," he said when she finished. "You're staying at the main house until this is over." "What are you going to do?" "Handle it." David Kim disappeared after that. Not dead. Seung-jun was too smart for murder, too aware of how bodies created problems that were harder to solve than living complications. Just gone. Discredited, disbarred. Every bridge burned, every door that had been opened to him suddenly and permanently closed. He'd made his choice. Now he got to live with it somewhere far away from anything that mattered. Madame Han made her move 3 days later. An invitation to lunch, delivered through channels that suggested she knew exactly where Liana was staying, despite the increased security. Public place, neutral ground, one of those restaurants in Beverly Hills where being seen was the point. "Just us," the invitation said. "Woman to woman." Seung-jun told her not to go, told her it was obviously a trap. Obviously bait designed to create an opportunity or gather intelligence or accomplish something that wouldn't be clear until it was too late. Liana went anyway, but she wore a wire, the kind Ji-won had taught her to use, and Ji-won was 3 tables over looking like just another woman having lunch alone while she monitored every word through an earpiece. Madame Han was already there when Liana arrived, elegant and controlled in the way Minw had learned to be. Every gesture calculated for maximum impact with minimum effort. She stood to greet Liana with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming," Madame Han said as they sat. "I wasn't sure you would. I was curious what you wanted to say that required this much theatre." "Direct. I appreciate that." Madame Han ordered for both of them without asking. The kind of power move that was probably supposed to establish dominance. You seem like a smart woman, Liana, so I assume you know what this is. My ex-husband is using you to humiliate me and my son. When he's done, he'll discard you the same way Minw did. Probably less publicly, but the result will be the same. Maybe, but at least he's honest about what he wants. Is he? Madame Han leaned forward slightly. Did he tell you he can't have children? That his entire legacy dies with him? You're not building anything with Seung-jun. You're decorating his ending. The words landed like they were supposed to, hit the vulnerable places that still existed, despite everything Liana had learned. She managed to keep her expression neutral, managed to not give Madame Han the satisfaction of a visible reaction. The conversation continued, circling around the real point like predators testing defences. Madame Han offered money first, a substantial amount to just leave, disappear, let the adults handle their business without complications. When that didn't work, she moved to threats, carefully worded but unmistakable. And finally, when neither money nor fear produced the desired effect, she played what was clearly her real card. "There's a warehouse in San Pedro," Madame Han said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Tomorrow night. Seung-jun's planning to meet someone there about a shipment transfer. If you care about him at all, keep him away, because I've made sure that if he shows up, federal agents will be waiting." She was giving up the location. Wanted Liana to warn Seung-jun, to prove he was compromised, that his new wife was a liability who couldn't keep information secure. Or wanted Liana to stay silent, to let him walk into a trap because she was too hurt or too angry about the children comment to protect him. Either way, Madame Han won. Either way, she got evidence of weakness she could exploit. Liana thanked her for lunch, declined dessert, left with the kind of grace that suggested the conversation had been pleasant instead of combative. In the car with Ji-won, they listened to the recording twice, making sure every word was clear, every implication documented. Then Liana called Seung-jun. "I know what she's planning, and I know how we turn it around on her." The plan came together over the next 18 hours. They fed Madame Han false confirmation that Seung-jun was walking into the trap, used channels they knew were compromised to make it look authentic. But simultaneously, Seung-jun was contacting federal agents with evidence of Madame Han's actual criminal operations, the ones that crossed lines into trafficking and money laundering that couldn't be explained away with expensive lawyers and plausible deniability. David Kim's records, recovered before he'd vanished, provided the foundation. Documentation of transactions that proved pattern and intent, names of people who could be pressured into testimony. The architecture of an organization that had gotten sloppy in its confidence. When federal agents raided the warehouse in San Pedro, they found Madame Han's people there along with evidence she'd staged to frame Seung-jun. Containers that were supposed to look like his shipments, documentation that would have tied him to operations he'd never been part of. The entire setup collapsed under scrutiny that had been aimed at the wrong target. Madame Han and Minw weren't arrested. Seung-jun made sure of that, for reasons involving family and future that he explained to Liana in the car afterward. "I don't want them in prison, I want them irrelevant. Prison makes martyrs. Bankruptcy and exile makes examples." And that's what happened. Financial destruction that was surgical in its precision. Social exile from every circle that mattered. Every door that had been opened suddenly closed. Every opportunity that had seemed guaranteed suddenly evaporated. Not dramatic. Just thorough. Minw tried to contact Liana once, a message that showed up 6 weeks after everything collapsed. She read it, felt nothing, deleted it without responding. Whatever he wanted to say didn't matter anymore. 6 months later, Liana's new script sold in a bidding war between 3 studios. The one about power and cost and people making impossible choices. It went for more money than she'd ever imagined possible, and none of it had anything to do with anyone's connections or family infrastructure. Just the work itself. She was pregnant, which hadn't been part of any plan but wasn't unwelcome. They'd stopped being careful somewhere around month 7 of their marriage. Stopped treating this like a temporary arrangement that needed boundaries. The doctor said she was 10 weeks along. Seung-jun had been there for the appointment, holding her hand, looking at the ultrasound screen like it was showing him something he'd thought was impossible. "Your ex-wife was lying," Liana had said in the car afterward, "about you not being able to have children." She was lying about a lot of things. That one just happened to hurt the most. They were in the main house kitchen now, the one that had become theirs instead of his. Seung-jun was teaching her how to make mayok guk, the seaweed soup traditionally eaten by new mothers. His grandmother's recipe, he said, one of the few things from his old life that he'd kept. "You still want out after the year?" he asked, not looking at her while he worked, keeping his hands busy with preparation. "The year ended 2 months ago," Liana pointed out. "I'm still here." "I know." They were building something, not perfect, not simple, but theirs. Something that had started as strategy and survival, but had become something else through proximity and choice, and the strange alchemy of 2 people who'd both been betrayed learning to trust again. The last evening of that week was quiet. Rain outside, the kind that turned Los Angeles soft and unfamiliar. They sat together reading pages of her new script, the one she was developing about a woman who married into a world she didn't understand and learned to navigate it anyway. He made notes in the margins like he always did. She argued with half of them like she always did. They were equals now, in the ways that mattered. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads you exactly where you needed to be all along. Liana walked into that marriage thinking it was just survival, just strategy, just a way to hit back at the people who'd treated her like she was disposable. But somewhere between the funeral flowers and federal raids, between learning to shoot and learning to trust again, she discovered something Minw and his family never understood. That real power isn't about control or manipulation. It's about choosing someone who sees you as an equal, not an accessory. It's about building something authentic instead of performing something acceptable. She thought she was decorating an ending. Turns out she was writing a beginning. If this story kept you hooked from start to finish, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me which moment had you most locked in. Was it the courthouse wedding? The Seoul comeback? That brutal lunch with Madame Han? I want to know. And if you're craving more stories about people who refuse to stay down when life knocks them over, subscribe and turn on notifications because I've got a whole library of revenge, redemption, and people who chose themselves when everyone else counted them out. New stories drop every week. Don't miss the next one. Now get out there and remember, you're never as powerless as someone wants you to believe. See you in the next story.